I think the solution to these problems we're facing lie in re-identifying as with humans as part of the natural world.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Alchemy Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Davis. The Alchemy Podcast explores a happier and healthier future for all. Featuring conversations with thought leaders, scientists, and change makers, we'll explore topics at the intersection of individual wellness, social equity, and sustainability. Join us as we look to bridge the gap between personal, community, and planetary well-being. Let's dive in. Hi, everybody. I am beyond excited to welcome Lauren Bash, aka Lauren, she, her, as a climate optimist, activist, and storyteller from LA. She dedicates her social channels to educate others on the climate crisis and plastic pollution crisis, as well as inspires solutions to tackle them. Her channels offer a mixture of silliness and sustainability, featuring skits, recipes, and educational content centered around the principles of climate action, connection, and community. Outside of her online presence, you can find her cooking yummy plant-based meals, surfing, and playing with her pup, Sunny. Hi, Lauren. Welcome to the Alchemy Podcast. We're so stoked to have you.
Hi, I'm so grateful to be here.
For those who don't know you or don't already follow you on social media, can you tell us a bit about who you are? And you can take that in any direction you want and how you really got to where you are today.
Yes. So my name is Lauren Bash. I'm a new Bash. I'm recently married. Well, we've been married for 2 years, but it still feels new. I married my college sweetheart and I live in LA. I'm born and raised in LA. I live by the beach in Santa Monica. The beach is my happy place, safe space. Like I tell people all the time, I feel like I contributed to the water in the ocean for my tears that I've cried, even since I was in high school or breakups. But I definitely have a deep affinity and love and appreciation for the ocean, which is how I joined the Surfrider Foundation, which was my entry into the climate activism space. And now I am, full-time content creator, like you said, creating content that I hope inspires and educates folks about the climate crisis and our role in tackling it.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to say, what was the triggering point for you to enter into the climate crisis? You mentioned Surfrider, but can you share a bit more about what shifted in you that made you feel like you wanted to get into it further?
Yes. So in 2017, when Trump was inaugurated, I think 2016 was a wake-up call for a lot of folks. I fully acknowledge my comfort and my privilege in not being an activist sooner, but it was offshore oil drilling, or the topic of offshore oil drilling became really prevalent after Trump was inaugurated. And we have drilling in all over California, in Ventura County and Orange County, north and south of LA, but not in LA. And I was like, hell no, how do I stop this? So I literally Googled how to stop offshore oil drilling in Los Angeles. And I found the Surfrider Foundation, and they had a whole campaign and a movement of protests and marches and things like that around offshore oil drilling called the Drilling is Killing campaign. And I had gone to a chapter meeting and met a lot of the team there. And they were like, you should come to a beach cleanup, or you should come to a ocean-friendly restaurant meeting. And I kept showing up, and then I just became a sponge for climate education. I went and did the certificate program at UCLA in sustainability.
Love it.
And then, I should also say too, my mom is a rock and environmentalist, and definitely raised my sisters and I with deep connection and respect for land. Her love language for the planet is through gardening and cooking. And beautiful. So we definitely had a lot of influence in the home. This is just how I found my own footing.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's so cool to hear how people get there, because everyone has their own unique story as to why they start to engage in these things. But for those who don't already know you too, or don't follow you already, I highly recommend you follow Lauren. Her content is amazing. And for someone who's been working in impact and climate for, over the past 10 years, it was really refreshing to have people like you, Lauren, join the movement and help make this so accessible for people, because it can feel so overwhelming. But can you share a bit more about how you personally like to use your platforms and voice to support climate action?
So this has been newer for me this year, really identifying what is my role in the movement and what can I offer that's unique and what does the movement need? And I felt like when I kept talking to folks, I'm like, are you the one green girl in your friend group? And you're like, yeah, I am. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. It's kind of how it always feels. You're the one who's putting out the recycling bin at a house party, or who's like trying to get your friends to sort out their compost, or like you're inviting them thrifting, or things that are like little sustainable invitations.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if that's true in my friend group and in my like IRL community, then that's definitely true on the internet. And so I've been embracing this one green girl in the friend group character, I guess, and trying to invite and welcome more perhaps like neutral folks into the climate movement who are like, I don't know what like methane is all about. And like I feel like people are getting really nuanced around pipelines and this, and everything feels like really nuanced and tricky. But I want to do something. Like I
Yeah.
want to do something, and so I'm like, bingo, those are my people. I'm talking to you. Welcome to the movement. We need everyone everywhere all at once. And so that's my position, I guess I like to play in the movement.
Yes. I was going to say, I feel like you are so good at making digestible content, like things that people can, who don't have any, let's say, environmental science background or know anything about the different greenhouse gas emissions. It's just like digestible and understanding what people can do immediately. But something that I know is so real for so many folks who have even historically been in the movement is climate anxiety. And for someone who's worked in this space, trying to figure out how to communicate it too is like, it's so easy for folks to not engage because they freeze up or they just don't know where to start. But besides the obvious of, we're reaching a tipping point of no return, like what do you think are some of the reasons why we are seeing such heightened climate anxiety in our world today?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't open your phone and like not have it, right? I
Yeah.
think that's more and more activists will like own it. And perhaps before we were like suppressing it, like
Yeah.
thanks, I guess, to like older generations who were like, no, we don't talk about these things. And now younger generations are like, we have to talk about these things.
We have to screen
Um,
these things.
yeah. So now I think we're just perhaps more vocal about it, but I don't think there's any lack of that for like older activists too who've experienced the trenches of this work as well. I just think obviously with the rise of the internet, like you're being bombarded all the time with messages about everything, whether it's climate or war or injustices happening all the time. It's your nervous system is, there's like alarms ringing every time you open any sort of screen. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's extremely overwhelming, anxiety inducing. Or I think something that contributes to it too, which I think they're one and the same, is this like apathy we can almost create when we're on
Yep.
social media or on the internet, is because you read all of it and you're like, that is so effing overwhelming. How am I supposed to be able to do anything about that? So I
Yep.
am therefore going to disengage, disassociate, because that's intense, you
Yes.
know?
Yes.
And yeah, like that's of course what big industry and like the big polluters want us to do, is be inactive, right? They
Yes.
continue to do damage, unregulated damage, while we stay overwhelmed and apathetic and inactive.
Yeah. And I know something else too that has been in the rise of just like the social media world as well is just like we need to focus more on progress, not perfection, versus like shaming folks for just trying to take a step in the right direction. So I don't know. I'm just curious your point of view on this, eco shaming on the internet and just in general.
Yes. Well, I know we've talked about this before. I'm very passionate about this. I have a new rule. Any of your listeners can take it, or a new slogan. Every time you shame someone for their carbon footprint, Jamie Dimon makes $1 million. And Jamie Dimon is the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, who has invested like trillions of dollars in oil and gas since whatever the past decade. And so it might not be a trillion yet, but it's probably like high billions. But it's true, right? Like no one's talking about Jamie Dimon. People are talking about an influencer on the internet who like took a flight home to the East Coast to see her family, but and they're trying to hold her accountable in her comment section. I'm like, where's the same fervor and angst and
Yes.
valid anger directed at the folks who are causing this damage? It's the same thing. People say individual action doesn't matter. We need systems change. And I'm like, then why are we shaming folks for their individual actions? You
Yes.
know?
Again, I keep coming back to the way you position your content, but I really do feel like there's a skit series I think that you do. I think it's called your skit series.
Yes.
I'm gonna butcher it. How about you share a bit more about this? I love it. I think it addresses this really well.
Yeah, I started creating skits. I'm also like a theater kid. I was like a theater major my freshman year of college. So I'm like, wait, and skits aren't new to the internet, right? Like you can't open TikTok without seeing one. So I'm not like coining this format. But I was like, oh, this is a great format to use when talking about sustainability or climate education, because these are real conversations I've had with people. Like more often than not, these are based on true events. And so I'm like, this is perfect because you either see yourself in it from like the activist perspective, or you see yourself in it when you're like, that's a valid freaking question. And I want to know that. And so I'm like, that's all we're trying to do here is just create level playing ground where people feel heard, seen, and acknowledged. And then how can we come together to take action? Some are a bit more like exaggerated or whatever, hyperbolizing others. But yeah, these are the conversations I've had in real life, or friends have told me like, you should do it about talking to your crazy uncle about why you don't want things from Amazon for the holidays. And I'm like, bingo. I may not have had that conversation, but I know thousands of other people have, you know?
Yeah, totally. No, 100%. And I feel like just the movement on the internet has shifted so much. Like, do you remember? It probably was like a handful of years ago where every like environmentalist was like, "Oh, look at my refill bottles," or like,
Dude.
it was like such a thing, which I appreciate so much because it was a good way to start having the conversation. But to your point, it's like not everyone has accessibility to live that way. But I mean, I appreciate for it was, but I think it comes back to progress, not perfection, and us not feeling like we need to sit in a box of being like, I have zero waste in my life. I'm not going to buy a snack and I'm going to bring my glass jar with me everywhere. But that's great for some, but it's not accessible for everybody. So, anyways, just
Yes.
interesting to see how the movement has shifted too.
I got to talk to high school students over the summer about like the early days of sustainability on the internet. And I wasn't necessarily a creator at this point, right? I was like a consumer of this content. And it was so toxic. Like the glass jar, a lot of the creators in during that time have since like owned their shit and been like, this was really damaging and we take responsibility. And like, we know exactly what you said. We need to own progress, not perfection anymore. And we understand how problematic this messaging around zero waste was. So I acknowledge them for that. But I was definitely a consumer of this content. And I was telling these high school kids, and I was like, yeah, there was this thing, this challenge where you had to put all your trash in a jar. And they were like, what? And I'm like, what were you guys doing? I was like, yeah, we would shame each other if you went to Starbucks and got a cup.
Oh
And like
yeah.
you refused, a plastic cup on the airplane because and then if you didn't have your own water, you would just go thirsty for hours on the flight because it meant you were using plastic. And they were like, what are you saying? These are climate activists, high school kids,
Yeah.
right? And they're like, what? I'm like, damn, bless y'all for not being on the internet in like 2010 during the zero waste movement.
Yes, I was gonna say it was just so. I mean, I even for someone who like works in this space, more of like a corporate sustainability context, I remember like feeling like I needed to be that stickler in the office space, being like, no plastic anywhere, or like no this, no that. I'm like, there's always obviously we strive to be better,
Yeah.
but there are gonna be moments when someone comes in and they have like a to-go box and you know or we get food for an office and you just have no other choice but then to get something
I
that's
know.
not in a reused container. So to your point, like there's always ways in which we can improve, but I love how the narrative has really shifted, and I think it's so healthy that it's shifted to
Yes.
have more of a dialogue around, okay, this is where I am today and this is where I can continue to move and progress. And it goes right back to this whole idea of mindfulness, right? Like mindfulness is all about observation and being able to be aware of like what our actions are, how we're feeling, and how those hurt or harm others around us. It's like the
Yeah.
same thing with the climate movement. That's just shifting to more of a place of compassion and empathy versus
Yes.
like the scrutiny and like anger that I
Yes.
feel like was really early on, which I think had its place to be honest. But yeah, I love to see that it's shifted to more of
Yes.
a place of compassion in
And
recent
no
years.
judgment, right?
Yes.
Like through mindfulness, it's like I observe that and I'm not judging that. I am just
Yeah,
observing. It's the same thing. It's like
it's
I see that,
exactly.
no judgment.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
no
see it, I
shame.
observe it, and I can discern moving forward if I can make a change to be better, but I'm not gonna judge myself for that moment in time.
Boom. Yep.
Yeah. No, and that kind of just really leans into some of these like other things I want to talk to you more about, which is like what role does community, what role does this climate action work serve to the greater well-being of our planet? But let's start with community. I know like community is such a big part of you and how you live your life, both probably individually and in your content creation. But I'm curious, like what role then does community play in collective action or the
Yeah.
well-being of our planet?
I'm very passionate about community. I think it's actually been like later in life where I feel like I fully got it
Mhm.
because I think when you're young, your community is naturally your environment, like your classmates or yeah, through university, right? If you go to school, your community is more often than not those in your like immediate vicinity who you don't necessarily have a choice over who those folks are. You're like, okay, we're all classmates, we're all going here. But I feel like your adulthood, you get to decide who those people are, right? Through your passions, your interests, or whatever. And a mindfulness coach of mine, he had actually said, you will find your community when you do something you love so much that you would do it alone.
Yes.
So whether that's like your surfing or your running or your yoga practice or whatever, like when you keep showing up because you love it so much, then you'll naturally meet people who have this shared interest. And I feel like it's the same with climate activism as well. Like mine happens to be Surfrider, but there are so many other environmental orgs for whichever like pillar of climate that you're passionate about, regenerative agriculture or food or tech or like policy or lobbying or whatever. Like you'll find your people. It's my number one recommendation to folks all the time when they say, I want to do something about the climate crisis, but I don't know what to do. And I'm like, because it's not what can I do? It's what can we do is the answer or the question, I guess. And so by plugging into a community group, there's elders who have been in those groups for decades, right? And they're like, oh, they have so much wisdom to impart on us. They've already we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time we gather. There's like so much amazing work that's already being done. We can just jump into these long existing communities and say like, this is the skills I have to offer. How can I support the movement?
Totally. And it's this like beautiful connection with each other. Just going back to that grassroots movement a little bit, and like sometimes I think when we're, especially on the internet, everything is so far, it can feel so far. And so when we come back, especially after, the pandemic, when we're in isolation, I think there's something really beautiful in this moment in time that we're like coming back together in community and like real human to human interaction and talking about the problems, working at it at a grassroots level directly in our communities where we're living and working and like living our day-to-day life. And there's something really cool about that element that I think is starting to resurge again.
100%.
Within just community building. In a similar vein, you have evolved so much. I mean, like I said, I've been watching your content for a number of years, and it's been so cool to see your passions and your journey evolve. But where do you see yourself going next?
I heard someone say the other day that like we'll be on TikTok until it's AR and we're wearing like goggles to watch content. And I was like, and that's when I'm out. Like, yeah, that's not my some people perhaps hear that and get really excited and they're like, oh, they love the tech and like evolution of all these things. Not me. I do know in my core that I'm a storyteller. Like even last week I was watching baby videos for this project I'm working on. And I was like holding a video camera, being silly in the mirror and like shooting my sister and shooting our little pet mouse and like all of this. And I'm like, oh wow, I think it's always been in me to want to tell stories. Perhaps it's like the theater kid too. So I know I'll be a storyteller forever and ever. The medium that lives on, I think will probably evolve as like social media and media evolves. I'm working on my first short film right now, which feels like, when you do something that you were like always supposed to do, you're like, oh, thank you. It's like washing your hair after like having like a dirty hair for weeks. You're like, oh, I know I needed to do this and this feels so good,
Yes.
But I will say it's extremely intimidating because I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. And it's so much easier. The same thing of like, you do what you're good at because it feels good. And like, perhaps like an ego hit of like, oh yeah, I can make a TikTok. I'm good at this and it's going to do well. And I got this down. And then someone's like, great, sit down for like 6 hours and start editing this film. You're like, what? Like, where do you even begin? And so, yeah, I think I'm getting a taste of what it's like to be in longer form media. And I definitely I think I'm tasting what the future will look like. I was
going to say, do you feel like the longer form media might include or still be in the vein of the climate work, or do you have other things?
For sure. Oh, yeah. Okay. I will die. Like, I will die fighting for like a thriving, cooler, more equitable planet. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, love it. I was just like, I don't know. Maybe you're taking a pivot.
No. Oh no, when I see old folks at climate marches, I'm like, I feel like I'm getting a taste of my future. That's so messed up. It's so messed up, right? Because you're thinking like, damn, are we still going to have to be fighting for this in like 50 years or 60 years? I used to have it on my like intentions or my goals sheet that I want to see in my lifetime, the earth start to cool. And it might be a bit ambitious. And perhaps I don't need to be like marching and protesting, but I know that this stuff takes time.
Hold it. I love that. Keep that at the top. I'm there with you. There's so many people who are there with you. There's so much hope there, and I think we need more of that. We need more hope and less like doom and gloom in the movement in general.
I mean, there's so many amazing channels and climate media groups now who have Instagram and newsletters and Substack and everything. And there's one called Earthly Education, and they're kind of like a meme account, but I really appreciate their stuff. And they have one of the, I think, yes, we need to have hope and optimism, but we also need to have like a big scoop of reality with it too. And I think sometimes in the like toxic positivity side of climate, we're like, look at all these things. This is great. And it is wonderful to like fill our hope tanks with that. But we also need to sit with the heaviness and the grief and the reality that, a warming planet is like 2 degrees. We've hit 2 degrees.
Yeah.
2 degrees Celsius, which is we want to say below 1.5, like forever. So that's heavy and that's real. And that also requires us sitting with that and honoring the reality of that and propelling that to act more urgently, or like more boldly or more courageously. Not necessarily like only activists, but maybe also leading with that when we're recruiting or informing new folks. It's like, hey, this is called the climate emergency for a reason.
Yeah, totally. No, and I appreciate that so much. But like, I think goes back to my inertial question too. Like, how do you find balance in your content creation then, right? Because you want to have people need to be real and understand the problem and understand the urgency. But at the same time, we want to get people involved in a way that feels not overwhelming. So how do you think about that balance between the two when you're like talking about this?
I feel like my choice personally has not been to use the like extreme, urgent, immediate language. I hope that folks who follow me, I'm not the only climate creator that they're following, right?
Yeah.
That they also have like a mix, because there are several amazing creators who do. They're like, SOS, alarm bells are ringing. We need to take immediate action. I definitely have that messaging like sprinkled throughout, but it's not the like, because I do feel like that, what we were talking about earlier, that instills this like apathetic scroll by, sensory overload, not for me, scroll by. I also feel like I have to acknowledge the platforms that I'm on where someone could do that. They're not sitting in a movie theater for 2 hours where they've committed this allotment of their time. They're like, I'm disengaged and I'm going to go. So I think when things happen, like when the IPCC report is published or when the IRA passes or things like that, there were those moments to be like, we need to act now. Like all the research or all the science shows that we need to act now. And this is how we can do it,
Yeah.
Or like today we got awful news that the Willow Project was passed. So after like all of this activism and advocacy against it, it was ultimately passed in court today. So moments like that can be really defeating because we worked really, really hard to advocate against it. So I guess that's a good moment too, to like sit and mourn and grieve that like there's going to be really dark days in our work as well, but know that that can't stop us and we have to keep going.
Yes, totally. And I love what we were saying about earlier. It's like honoring the feeling. It's like goes back to even just a personal practice of wellness. It's like honoring what comes up, honoring how you feel, giving space to mourn and feel and acknowledge, and then being able to take that and move with more mindfulness and integrity moving forward.
Yeah.
With that as wisdom to help then propel the next place.
Yes.
That kind of brings me to the final kind of couple questions that I always like to talk about is like, what role do you believe climate action plays in our collective well-being? And because this podcast, this community that we're building is really all about the intersectionality between our individual wellness, our community well-being, and our planet's well-being. And so I'd love to hear from you, like your perspective on how climate action can really support this collective well-being for all that we're trying to build here together.
Have you read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer? It's like the best, right? It should be I wish I would have read that instead of like Of Mice and Men in high school. For sure. Like I can't wait to see the core novels changed in schools. Yes. I hope over the years. I try to read it every April for Earth Month. There's so much of this integrated, like it's not even a practice, like integrated belief system in Indigenous beliefs, right? That there is no separation of the natural. We are the natural world. Like we are part of it. And through white supremacy and colonization, humans, the Western world, has thought that we are superior or separate from it, right? That's what's causing all of this mass destruction, because we see the natural world or natural resources as something to be exploited and extracted and not reciprocated. And so that book, I mean, just shows like all Indigenous wisdom and belief system hold deep like identity with the natural world. So when you talk about the collective, we're like, oh, well, this is it. This is the solution. Is identifying that we are part of the natural world and that we have to take care. Like everything in nature takes care of each other. That's it. You know,
Yeah.
Everything is cyclical. Everything has a rule. Everything takes care of each other. That's it. It's like a self-sustaining planet,
Yeah.
right? Without human intervention. And so I think the solution to these problems we're facing lie in re-identifying as with humans as part of the natural world.
Yeah. No, I love that. I resonate with that so much. And I think something that I know for me personally through my practice, my yoga, my mindfulness practice is one of the mantras that's always said, which is Loka Samasta Sukhi no Bhavantu, which means may all beings everywhere be happy and free. And I know there's so many other like similar mantras and different types of spiritual background or spiritual teachings, but it's the same essence of that, like we are all connected. And like when we are healing ourselves, we can show up in better service for each other and the planet. And so like that same essence, I feel like needs to kind of be shared so that we can, understand why the planet is crying and, and feel that more innately because we're more it too. For a little call to action for our listeners, what are one or two things that they can do today to take climate action?
So like I mentioned, I think first and foremost, joining a community group is probably like the biggest, boldest, in my opinion, best step you could take for the climate movement, because there are so many organizations who would be so grateful for your support and your time and your energy and your skills and your ideas. And there's so much opportunity and possibility there joining into community group. Like I said, whichever like you identify with most. It doesn't if it's not public facing, like I think it was Leah Thomas from Intersectional Environmentalists said every movement needs an accountant. And it's so true too. Like you don't have to be on the forefront. You don't like I enjoy that stuff because I'm a bona fide extrovert. But if you're not, like you can be behind the scenes. You don't have to like talk to anybody and you can still be part of the climate movement. But just showing up. These are my skills and talents. How can I support these community groups? Secondly, I think something I'm very passionate about that I'm also trying to honor too is my connection to land through my food and learning like what is local, what is in season. Shopping locally in there and eating seasonally. Like food is at its richest nutritional density when it's seasonal. And then what we were talking about earlier, the reciprocity of returning the like food scraps back to the land so it can continue to fertilize and nourish new growth. I think it's like the coolest thing we can participate in, 2-3 times a day. And what we choose to eat and then returning those nutrients back into the soil, back into the land. And so I think it's a fun invitation for folks to ask, like, where does my food come from? Can I support, like we talked about, Alma Backyard Farms? Can I support a local farm and ask where my food comes from and honor the like integrity of this food by allowing it to return back to the land instead of going to a landfill?
Yes. Yes. I love that. I think food is such an easy way, to your point, to reconnect every day to something that was grown from the earth that we have to connect with to nourish ourselves.
Yes.
And it needs to return back. So thank you, Lauren. I am beyond honored to have you here. And I'm really excited to share this conversation with all our fellow community members. But I, again, just want to say thank you so much for being here and doing what you do. I know the world is definitely a better place with you on it.
Aww. Thank you for doing what you do. I'm so grateful for this. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Alchemy Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation today, you can find more about the speaker in our show notes below. In order to build a global community committed to well-being for all, we need your help. So please rate and subscribe to wherever you're listening from. Finally, we cannot do this without the help of our amazing team. A huge thank you and shout out to Lindsay Todd, our producer. All right, y'all, have a lovely, lovely day.